She was left to die on snow, but a human soldier held her before her last breath. Lieutenant James Harlow trudged through knee-deep snow, the howling wind of Valaris 4 drowning out the distant sounds of artillery. His scouting mission had taken him farther from base than planned, but the eerie quiet in this sector suggested the Ceridian forces had withdrawn, at least temporarily. The planet's 3 moons cast an otherworldly blue glow across the frozen landscape. James checked his oxygen levels, still 4 hours before he'd need to worry. The war against the Ceridians had dragged on for 3 years now, a brutal conflict over the planet's rare minerals. Both sides claimed righteous purpose, but after watching friends die, James struggled to remember what they were fighting for. A flash of purple against white caught his attention. Blood. Ceridian blood. Training took over as he raised his pulse, rifle scanning for threats. The trail led behind a jagged ice formation, and there she lay, a Ceridian warrior, her silver-scaled skin dulled with frost, violet blood pooling beneath her torso. Her combat uniform was torn, revealing intricate markings along her arms that signified high rank. James kept his distance, weapon trained on her. Ceridians were known for playing dead to ambush humans, but something seemed wrong. Her wounds weren't from human weapons. "Command, this is Harlow." He spoke into his comm. Only static answered. The mineral deposits in these mountains blocked signals for miles. The Ceridian's eyes fluttered open, startling amber with vertical pupils that narrowed at the sight of him. She hissed something in her language, then winced, more purple blood seeping through her fingers where she clutched her side. "I should leave you," James said, more to himself than her. To his surprise, she responded in halting English. "Then, why hesitate, human?" Military protocol was clear. Capture enemies when possible, call for extraction. But communications were down, night was falling, and temperatures would drop to lethal levels within hours. The nearest outpost was his own hidden observation shelter, 2 miles away. "What happened to you?" he asked, keeping his distance. The Ceridian female's jaw tightened. "My squadron. I refused orders." Each word seemed to cost her. "What orders?" "To execute civilians, your miners." She coughed, violet droplets spattering the snow. "Insubordination, punishment is death." James lowered his weapon slightly. Intelligence reports had mentioned faction disputes among Ceridian leadership regarding treatment of civilians. If she was telling the truth, "What's your name and rank?" he asked. "Commander Nixara," she replied, her voice growing fainter. "4th Battalion." The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against his face shield. Night was falling faster than expected, and the temperature reading on his HUD was plummeting. If he left her, she'd be dead within the hour. "I should be smarter than this," James muttered, slinging his rifle and approaching cautiously. Nixara tensed but was too weak to resist as he assessed her injuries, a deep gash across her side, multiple lacerations, and signs of severe cold. Exposure. Ceridians weren't built for this climate. Their homeworld was warm and arid. She spoke again, her voice barely audible. "If you seek information, I will tell you nothing." "I'm not looking for intelligence," James replied, unfolding his emergency thermal blanket. "But we'll both freeze if we stay here." Nixara's eyes widened with confusion as he carefully wrapped the blanket around her. When he attempted to lift her, she growled and tried to push him away, but her strength was gone. "You can fight me and die here, or you can trust me and maybe survive," James said firmly. "Choose quickly." Her amber eyes locked with his for a long moment. Finally, she gave a slight nod. The journey back to his shelter was arduous. Though lighter than a human of similar size, Nixara was still a burden through the deepening snow. By the time the small camouflage structure came into view, James's muscles burned with fatigue. Inside, he activated the heating system and laid her on his cot. Under better light, her injuries looked worse, the silver-scaled skin around her. Wounds turning an alarming grey. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. "Why?" she asked as he gathered medical supplies. James paused. Why indeed? She was the enemy. Saving her could be considered treason. "Because today I'm choosing to be a medic, not a soldier," he finally answered. "And maybe I'm tired of this war making monsters of us all." Nixara's expression remained unreadable, but she didn't resist as he began treating her wounds. Outside, the wind howled louder, sealing them together in this fragile shelter. Enemies by circumstance, reluctant companions by choice. Dawn broke with the distinctive lavender hue of Valaris IV's primary sun, casting long shadows through the shelter's single window. James checked the communications panel again. Still nothing but static. The storm had intensified overnight, making any attempt to reach base camp suicidal. Across the small room, Nixara watched him with wary eyes. She'd survived the night, which surprised them both. Ceridian physiology was resilient, but she'd lost. "Considerable blood. Your bandaging technique is adequate," she said, her voice stronger than the previous day. "For a human." James raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome." "I did not thank you." She attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounds. "You should stay still," James cautioned, approaching with a water canteen. "Those lacerations need time to close." Nixara regarded the water suspiciously. "Poison. If I wanted you dead, I could have left you in the snow." He set the canteen within her reach and returned to the heater, adjusting its settings to conserve fuel. After a moment's hesitation, she took the water. James noticed the elegant, controlled movements of her six-fingered hand, each digit tipped, with a retractable claw, deadly in combat, yet surprisingly delicate as she handled the canteen. "Your squadron," James said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Will they look for you?" Nixara's expression hardened. "No. Among my kind, disobedience is betrayal. Betrayal means death. They believe that task complete. You chose to spare. Civilians at the cost of your life," James observed. "Why?" Her amber eyes narrowed. "You think Ceridians incapable of honor, that we are all mindless killers? I've seen enough combat to form opinions, as have I." She gestured to a scar along her shoulder, one he hadn't treated. "Human incendiary round Orion's settlement. 37 Ceridian healers died." James felt a familiar weight in his chest. "War makes victims of us all." Pretty words from the victor species. "Does this look like victory to you?" He gestured around. The sparse shelter. "Freezing on a hostile planet? Fighting over rocks?" Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but recognition. She studied him with renewed interest. "You are unusual for a human soldier." James busied himself checking supplies. "I was a medical student before conscription, planned to be a doctor, not a fighter. Yet, you kill efficiently." "I do what's necessary to survive," he replied, unable to keep bitterness from his voice. "Same as you." The shelter fell silent except for the howling wind. James prepared a meal from his rations, bland protein cubes designed for human metabolism. He hesitated, then offered one to Nixara. "Our scientists studied your biology," she said, accepting the cube cautiously. "This will provide minimal nutrition for me, but it is considerate." It was the closest thing to gratitude he expected. As the day progressed, James monitored her condition while maintaining the shelter's systems. The storm showed no signs of abating, trapping them together indefinitely. By evening, Nixara had recovered enough strength to sit upright, though pain still lined her features. "Your commander," she said as James changed her bandages. "What will they do when they discover you harbored an enemy?" The question had haunted him since he'd made the decision to save her. Court-martial, probably, possibly execution, depending on how the brass feels that day. Her gaze sharpened. "Then why risk it?" James worked in silence for a moment, considering. "My grandfather told me stories about old Earth wars, how medics would treat enemy soldiers. In the moments between breaths, he'd say, we're all just people in pain." Nixara seemed to digest this. "On my world, we have a similar concept, Sharelvk, the space between heartbeats where truth lives." "What truth is that?" "That life itself is sacred." She looked away. "My people have forgotten this teaching." James finished securing the fresh bandage. Her skin felt warmer than before. A good sign. As he withdrew his hands, her fingers caught his wrist in a gentle but firm grip. "Your touch," she said, studying his hand with scientific curiosity. It is warmer than I expected. Human body temperature runs higher than Ceridian, he explained, strangely uncomfortable under her scrutiny. She released him and leaned back. When I was a novice warrior, we were taught that humans were cold, in body and spirit. Another falsehood. The wind slammed against the shelter walls, a reminder of their precarious situation. James checked the weather scanner. Storm's picking up again, we might be here for days. Nixara's gaze drifted to the window where snow swirled in hypnotic patterns. I should be your prisoner. Instead, I am... What? Right now? A patient. And, after I heal. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. James had no answer that made sense within the framework of the war, of his duty, of everything he'd been taught about the enemy. Let's focus. On keeping you alive first, he finally said. The rest we'll figure out when we have to. Nixara nodded, a gesture she must have learned from observing humans. In the dim light of the shelter, with the boundary between enemies temporarily suspended, they had reached a fragile understanding, not quite trust, but something like recognition. Outside, the storm raged on, isolating them from the war and giving them something rarely found on the battlefield. Time to see each other as more than targets. 3 days passed in the small shelter, marked by the rhythmic howling of the wind and the gradual improvement of Nixara's condition. The storm had evolved into a full planetary weather event, something the locals called a crystal siege, a phenomenon where ice particles became so dense they could slice through exposed flesh. James found himself oddly comfortable with their enforced proximity. Nixara was proving to be a thoughtful companion, curious about human customs and surprisingly willing to share insights about her own culture. "This is what you call chess?" she asked, examining the makeshift board James had fashioned from his medkit container, with supplies as pieces. "A simplified version," he replied, demonstrating how each piece moved. "It's a game of strategy, thousands of years old on Earth." Nixara picked up the antibacterial spray that served as the queen. "Your species creates games that mimic warfare, as do mine. What games do Ceridians play?" A faint smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. "We have Teshala, a game of territory and resource management. Moves can take days to complete. Some matches last generations. Sounds intense. It teaches patience." Her amber eyes studied the board. "Something your kind seems to lack." James laughed softly. "Fair assessment." The shelter creaked ominously as another gust battered its frame. The temperature regulator hummed louder, struggling against the external cold. James checked the power reserves, 3 days at most before they'd need to conserve more drastically. "Your wound is healing well," he noted as Nixara shifted position. "Faster than I expected. Ceridian cellular regeneration accelerates when..." She paused, seeming unsure whether to continue. "When what?" "When we feel secure," she admitted, as if revealing a tactical weakness. Stress hormones inhibit healing. The implication hung between them. She felt safe with him. Night fell early on Valaris 4 during storms. As darkness enveloped the shelter, they shared another meal of rations. James had discovered that mixing certain emergency supplements created something tolerable to Ceridian digestion. "You mentioned you were cast out for refusing to attack civilians," James said carefully. "Was that the first time you disobeyed?" Nixara was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. "I commanded the 7th Talon for 5 cycles. Under my leadership, we conquered 3 systems." Pride tinged her words, but conquest changed as resources became scarce. "Our orders grew." Cruel. She traced a pattern on her arm, following the silver markings of her rank. The High Command began targeting infrastructure, water purification, atmospheric processes, weapons that would kill slowly, painfully. "Biological warfare," James murmured. "I protested privately at first, then publicly." Her expression darkened. "The final order came 3 rotations ago. Eliminate a mining colony, including the young. Make it seem as though environmental failure was responsible." James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. "The Axis miner settlement?" Nixara nodded. I redirected my squadron, claimed false coordinates. When discovered, I was deemed Vrexa soul dead. My second-in-command carried out my execution. Her hand moved to the wound at her side. Or tried to. Your own people tried to kill you. For refusing to murder children. James shook his head. And they call us the savages. Every war creates monsters on both sides, she said, echoing his earlier sentiment. I have killed many humans, James Harlow. Some still haunt my dreams. The use of his name startled him. It was the first time she'd addressed him directly. What? About you, she asked. What haunts your dreams? James stared into the red glow of the heater. Settlement called New Harmony. My unit was deployed after a Ceridian attack. We were supposed to evacuate survivors. His hands clenched involuntarily. Found a school shelter, children, teachers, all executed. Methodically. Not all Ceridians approve such tactics, Nixara said softly. I know that now. He met her gaze. But for a long time it was easier to hate all of you. The shelter fell silent. Outside, the wind had momentarily died, creating an eerie quiet that emphasized their isolation from both their peoples. The High Command speaks of humans as a plague, Nixara finally said. But in truth, they fear you. Fear us. Your technology is centuries beyond ours, not your weapons, your adaptability, your connections. She gestured between them. Enemies who become allies overnight, species who form bonds despite differences. This terrifies them. James considered this. Is that why you're talking to me now? To understand the enemy? Nixara's expression softened unexpectedly. I am talking to you because you saved me when your training dictated otherwise, because you see me as a being worthy of life. She hesitated. And because the silence is difficult. The confession, so simple, so human in its vulnerability, broke something in the careful distance James had maintained. Here was not just an alien commander, but a person cast out by her own kind, wounded, in body and spirit. My grandmother had a saying, he offered. Strangers are just friends waiting to be met. Your grandmother was either very wise or very foolish, Nixara replied, but the harshness had left her voice. Probably both. James smiled. Most humans contain contradictions, as do Ceridians. She extended her hand, palm up, a Ceridian gesture of trust exposing vulnerable veins. Perhaps we are not so different after all. After a moment's hesitation, James placed his hand over hers. Her skin was cooler than his, the texture like smooth leather with the faint ridges of scales. 5 fingers met 6 in a bridge between worlds. When the storm clears, she said quietly, what happens to us? It was the question they'd both been avoiding, and James had no simple answer. But in that moment, with their hands joined in the dim light of their shelter, the war seemed very far away. The storm broke on the 7th day, revealing a transformed landscape glittering under twin suns. Communications systems crackled back to life as atmospheric interference cleared. James stood at the shelter's entrance, staring at his comms unit. Base is requesting status update. They've been searching for me. Nixara sat on the edge of the cot, testing her strength. The wound had healed enough for movement, though a violet scar remained visible against her silver skin. You must report, she said matter-of-factly. Your people believe you dead. And tell them what? James turned to face her. That I've been harboring a Ceridian commander? Tell them you found nothing, that you survived alone. Her eyes met his. Then leave before they arrive. The simplicity of her suggestion caught him off guard. You want me to lie? To abandon you here? I want you to live, James Harlow. Her voice carried no room for argument. Your military will not understand what has transpired between us. He knew she was right. The fragile connection they'd built over the past week, through chess games, shared stories, and quiet conversations about worlds beyond the war, would be incomprehensible to his superiors. At best, they'd believe he'd been manipulated, at worst brainwashed. Before he could respond, the comms unit crackled again. Lieutenant Harlow, this is Captain Reeves. Acknowledge immediately. James hesitated, then pressed the transmitter. Harlow. Here, sir, alive and well. Thank God. Relief colored the captain's voice. Location? Observation Shelter 17, Northern Quadrant. Storm kept me pinned down. Stay put. Extraction team inbound, ETA 40 minutes. 40 minutes. The reality of their situation crashed down around them. You need to go, James said urgently, gathering survival gear. Head east toward the ravine system. The mineral deposits will mask your biological signature. Nyxara stood, her movement fluid despite her healing wounds. My people will be searching. As well. The storm's end means resumed hostilities. All the more reason to move quickly. He handed her his sidearm and emergency pack. These should help. She accepted them with a solemn nod. You risk much. So did you when you refused your orders. James checked the window, calculating routes. We both chose something beyond duty. They worked in tense silence, preparing for separation. As Nyxara donned the thermal gear he'd modified to fit her taller frame, James found himself memorizing details, the precise amber shade of her eyes, the elegant curve of her neck ridges, the way her silver markings caught the light. There's a neutral trading post in the Caridwen system, he said suddenly. 3 weeks' travel from here. Nyxara paused. I know of it. If we both survive this war. He left the suggestion unfinished. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. A human and a Ceridian meeting for Teshka? She used their word for the bitter herb drink similar to coffee. Unprecedented. This whole situation is unprecedented. The distant whine of approaching transport engines cut their time shorter than expected. James peered through the window and cursed. They're early, you need to leave now. Nyxara moved toward the rear exit, then stopped. In one fluid motion, she removed a metallic emblem from her undersuit, her commander's insignia. Among my people, this is given to those who save a life. She pressed it into his hand. A poor payment for my debt to you. James closed his fingers around the warm metal. There is no debt between friends. The word hung between them. Friends, inadequate yet revolutionary. Nyxara hesitated, then placed her 6-fingered hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Remember the space between heartbeats, James Harlow. Where truth lives. Then she was gone, a silver shadow disappearing into the icy landscape. Minutes later, the human transport landed, disgorging soldiers who approached with weapons ready. Captain Reeves himself entered the shelter, his weathered face showing relief. Thought, "We'd lost you, Lieutenant." "Just weathering the storm, sir," James replied, conscious of the Ceridian emblem hidden in his pocket. Reeves glanced around the shelter. "Alone all this time?" For a heartbeat, James considered confession. Instead, he nodded. "Yes, sir, just me." His lie bought her time, but as they lifted off, James spotted movement in the distance, a patrol of Ceridian soldiers tracking across the snow. Whether they were hunting Nyxara or simply resuming operations, the war had returned with the clear skies. 3 months later, James stood on the observation deck of the transport vessel Horizon, watching stars streak past. His reassignment to Medical Corps had raised eyebrows, but after his heroic survival during the storm, few questioned his request to return to his original training. The Valaris campaign had intensified, then mysteriously stalled. Reports suggested Ceridian forces were fracturing, internal conflicts about strategy and ethics leading to factional disputes. Information about a rebellious commander named Nyxara circulated among intelligence officers, describing her as a dangerous dissident advocating for ceasefire negotiations. James kept his knowledge to himself, though he wore her emblem beneath his uniform, a constant reminder of 7 days that had changed everything. The Horizon was bound for the Caridwen system, officially to establish a medical outpost, unofficially to gather intelligence on Ceridian movements in the neutral territory. James had volunteered immediately, ignoring knowing looks from his colleagues who assumed he sought revenge for his ordeal. Caridwen Station hung in space like a tarnished jewel, home to dozens of species who maintained neutrality in the human Ceridian conflict. As the human delegation disembarked, James separated from the group, claiming to seek medical supplies. The trading post's central market buzzed with activity, a cacophony of languages, smells, and colors that assaulted his senses. He moved purposefully toward a quiet corner where a small establishment served drinks to a diverse clientele. 3 weeks had passed since his coded message, sent through channels designed for prisoner exchange communications, using chess terminology they'd discussed during their confinement. There was no guarantee she'd received it, understood it, or chosen to respond. James ordered a bitter stimulant drink and chose a table facing the entrance. An hour passed, then 2. He was about to leave when a hooded figure entered, tall and graceful despite the concealing cloak. She sat opposite him without a word, lowered her hood just enough for amber eyes to meet his. "Lieutenant," Nixara said softly. "Commander," he replied, a smile breaking through his composure. "You're alive." "As are you." She studied him. "Your message was cleverly disguised. I wasn't sure you'd come. Nor was I." She accepted the drink he offered. "Things have changed since Valaris. I've heard rumors of Ceridian resistance movements." Nixara's expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed intensity. "Not resistance, reformation. Many of us question the war's purpose now." She leaned forward. "Including some in the high command." Hope flared in James's chest. "My superiors might say the same, though they'd never admit it publicly." "Then perhaps this meeting is more significant than either of us realized." James considered, his next words carefully. "I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I'm just a medic who made a choice in a snowstorm." "Sometimes," Nixara replied, "the most important changes begin with the smallest choices." She placed something on the table, a data crystal glowing with faint blue light. "This contains evidence of peace negotiations between Ceridian reformists and human moderate factions. Unofficial, of course." "Why give this to me?" "Because you showed me humans can be trusted." Her 6-fingered hand moved across the table, not quite touching his. "Because you saved an enemy and called her friend." James thought of the lives lost, the planets scarred by their conflict. Can 2 people really make a difference in a war this big? "We already have." Nixara's expression softened. "News of a human saving a Ceridian commander has spread. Despite efforts to suppress it, stories have power. Our story, our truth." She finally allowed her fingers to rest against his. In the space between heartbeats, around them the busy station continued its commerce, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place at a corner table. 2 former enemies, now something without, name in either language, planning the first fragile bridge between warring worlds. "It won't be easy," James said, acutely aware of her touch. "Both sides have generations of hatred to overcome. Nothing valuable ever comes easily." Nixara's amber eyes held certainty. "But if a Ceridian commander and a human lieutenant can find common ground in a shelter during a storm, perhaps our peoples can do the same." James thought of the frozen wasteland where they'd first met, how close they'd both come to death, and how that brush with mortality had revealed something more important than victory. "To the space between heartbeats," he said, raising his drink. Nixara mirrored his gesture. "And to choices that change worlds." Outside the viewport, stars shone on countless battlefields and potential homes alike. The war would not end tomorrow or the next day. But in that moment, between 2 people who had seen beyond the boundaries of species and allegiance, peace existed, not as a distant ideal, but as a living reality. Their hands remained connected. Across the table, 5 fingers and 6, a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossible just 3 months before. In the artificial gravity of the neutral station, they had created something weightless and profound, the possibility of a different future, born in ice and nurtured in understanding. The truth that lived in the space between heartbeats,